A very good evening to all of you in today's class, the weekly current affair lecture. So let's start today's lecture. Now, I had already shared the PPT with you all in the group. So let me see the topics. There are a few important topics which are in news in past 1 week. The privatization of railway, exactly what exactly it is. So we'll be discussing it. The Skill India for Atmanirbhar Bharat. Recently, there was a Lancet analysis on the population trends in India till 21st century. Uh, the military ties with Nepal, Afghanistan, Pakistan, transit trade agreement. Then Pragya guideline. Chabar port is a very important news recently in the past 1 week. Uh, Padmanabh Swami temple verdict by Supreme Court. And there are some small news, okay, so which are not so important, but they are there. Then this is news is important. Sistrum nocturnum. Okay, what is it? And these are the other news. Okay, let's start start with these all topics. The first and foremost topic is the privatization of Indian Railway. Now, the question here is that what do you mean by privatization of Indian Railways, and what exactly the news has been? Now, let me tell you a little, go in the background. So, 1850s was the time when the Indian Railways started, and in the beginning period, Indian Railways was mostly there were private players involved in the operation of Indian Railway. Even during the British time, there was private players also involved because mainly the railways were used to serve the British end. In 1951, railway was nationalized. Indian Railway was entirely nationalized. What do you mean by nationalized? Nationalized means everything came under the 100% government control. Okay, and everything of the railway, right from the operations of railway to making tracks to the rolling stock, that is the engine and the entire everything. Everything was done by railway. The controlling and signaling system. So everything was was done by railway. They were the operator also. They're regulator also of them. And above Indian Railway, there is a board called Railway Board, which oversees the operation. So it's a technical body which oversees the operation. So Indian Railway has a legacy of almost, you can say, 170 years, and that is a very richful legacy. But in the recent time, a question has always been asked that if we can have a private operator service in terms of, let's say, airport or aircraft, or you can say airlines. Similarly, it's the same we can have for the buses also, because we have public transport, the Parivahan Nigam of various state government. As at the same time, we have private operators also operating. So if it can happen, the same is true for ports as well. So there are private ports also, there are government ports. So if why can't we do same for the railway? And there has always been demand. Now in 2014-15, there was a committee by Bibek Dobroy. So Bibek Dobroy is a very famous economist in Modi government team, and Bibek Dobroy came with a reform mechanism. And Bibek Dobroy said that we need to look railway in a different way. The reason why, because railway is it's a huge structure right now, infrastructure. Currently, if I talk about today, there are around 13,000 railways operate on a daily basis. I'm talking about pre-COVID season. There are more than 2 to 2.5 crore passengers who travel daily. And railway is, you can say, the backbone of India's infrastructure. But there is a huge problem in railway. The problem in railway is that railway has not been able to provide the quality service as it is supposed. And if you compare with many developed countries, Indian Railway, is definitely, has its whole hallmark and history. But in many areas, the high service, or there are concerns of infrastructure lags. There have been concerns of saturation of routes, the service efficiencies in question. So n number of things are there. And in the past 5 years, the Modi government, or past 6 years, you can say, the Modi government has taken railway as one of the most important area of reform. And here they want to introduce private sector players also. But here the idea is to ensure that railway is going to use the infrastructure of, sorry, the private player are going to use or leverage the existing infrastructure of railways, and they will run the private trains. They will run the private trains, and remember, those they will operate the trains. For example, right now there are 1300 trains are there, so probably 150 trains will be run by these people, and they will be running, and that would be in the passenger category. Okay, so the passenger category, and the idea is to create another aspect of service efficiency. And recently, if you must have come across, there has been a news of Tejas trains. Okay, Tejas trains, and these Tejas train is not run by railway; it is run by a corporate or PSU of railway, that is IRCTC. So Tejas train was in news. So government is mulling with new options, and one way is this will augment revenue for the government. At the same time, this will also create competition within the railway. But it is not privatization of railway per se, but probably you can see leveraging the railway infrastructure and allowing the private players to operate. Okay, so that is what the entire debate is all about. So let's understand. This is the background I told you. So let's go and understand what exactly. So the first is Indian Railways passenger business. So on an average, railway operates more than 13,500 trains, and they have around 3,700 intercity mail and express services. There are a lot of regional trains. There are electric multiple unit operate on the suburban sections for intra-city passengers. So India's railway is a mammoth structure, but there is a problem. There is a huge concern of demand and supply gap. Okay, so Indian Railway is not able to meet the demand of the passenger requirement, and they are not able to augment. And one big reason is that the investment in railway has not been commensurate with the way railway is expected to perform in the economy. In the beginning of 1950s, railway was carrying almost 70% of the freight. Freight matlab malgadi. Okay, so we have two areas of train operation. One is of course the passenger area, and the second is the freight. Now freight is a huge revenue generating area. So this was 70% in the period of 1950s, and now today it has come down to around 25%. So, and the reason is why, because railway infrastructure has not been able to expand as the need of the economy. And the one reason they say is that because of bureaucracy, because of lack of investment, and because of a huge focus on the passenger service, because passenger service is a population demand. So it's a populist service, and every year, or you can say rail budget used to be there, which is no more right now. 3 years ago, rail budget was, 4 years ago, it was merged. So every year, so passenger traffic, has been the focus, and freight takes the back seat. But remember, passengers traffic is just 33% of the revenue of the railway. Of the entire revenue, 33% comes from the passenger, and the next comes almost 67% come from the freight. And the passenger service is in loss right now. Okay, because it is highly subsidized, and that is where government is looking ways to monetize the infrastructure, use in a different way, and this has been the reason. So let's understand what will happen in the coming years. Freight means malgadi. Okay, so let's understand the structure of Indian Railway passenger business. Okay, so intercity contribute. Now intercity and express service contribute, you can say, Indian Railways core passenger. It needs to be duly nurtured and developed. Within this category, there is an upper class portion who will be ready to pay higher price. Let's say you're traveling through a small budget airline, airline. Okay, but if you have an option of traveling overnight train with good service and with time efficiency, you would not mind taking a flight. Rather, you'll take a railway. So many a times, in many of the routes, we do not have a specific flights running across two places. Even though it could be a good business opportunity or good business connectivity. So here again, there is a lot of opportunity which private sector can leverage. Now let's analyze the implication of privatization decision. Now, as I mentioned, it is not privatization, but using the railway infrastructure and allowing private trains. So the first is reducing demand supply deficit. Second is encouraging model shift from air to rail. And third is reducing the transit time. The travel time has to be reduced. Leverage means maybe giving an advantage. Okay, so reducing demand supply deficit. So what is demand supply deficit? As I mentioned, right now railway has huge demand, but railway is not able to meet the demand. I'll give an example. Railway has expanded 1.6 times since independence, just 1.6 times, but the passenger traffic has increased by almost 6 times. So this is a big gap. And currently, you must have seen the railways are running late. The routes are oversaturated, and one of the reason is that the freight, that is the malgadi train, and the passenger, they run on the same route. Okay, same route. But in past 1 decade, a new, dedicated freight corridor has been right now it's in the process of being development. Almost 80% or 90% area is finished. So dedicated freight corridor. So almost 3,300 kilometers of dedicated freight corridor is made, and this dedicated freight corridor is only for the freight trains. Remember, now which means when this dedicated freight corridor will come into, and it is believed that by 2022 it will start the operation. Almost 90% work is over. So this is one of the most, you can say, ambitious project of railway since independence. And you have a dedicated freight corridors. One is the north south, east west, and one north south. So this east west is going to connect right from the northwestern India to the entire till the Kolkata and all those areas, and going up to Assam. And then we have north south is going to connect the northern part of India with southern part of India. So this is a dedicated freight corridor, and together there it is more than 3,300 kilometers, which means only the freight trains will run. Now, moment these freight trains will run, it will reduce the pressure on the existing tracks first. Second is already we are working on doubling of track, which is going in full pace. So in the coming 3-4 years, we are expecting huge amount of, you can say, scope of increasing new number of trains, and these new number of trains can run. So the one way is, of course, to maybe allow the private player, and here it is all about, remember, the private trains which are going to be run or managed by the private companies, they are basically looking at that upper class Indian who want to get safer, secure, and better journey, this thing. And right now Indian railway, the average speed is 40 kilometer per hour, the freight is 25 kilometer per hour. All this is going to change in the next 5 years, remember. And because right now if Modi government sustains, and if they come to another one more term, I would see that India's infrastructure is going to make huge changes in the world. So that is where we see. So first is reducing demand supply demand deficit. So passenger ridership has been stagnant, first of all, but there is a huge demand where we can make the railway take that demand. So despite the demand for train, it's 7 high density corridors stretched over 10,500 are remain clogged. Why? Because the track is same and you have more number of trains. Its stations and maintenance are overstretched. The speed remains low and services are far less than satisfactory. The rail travel demands far outstrips supply and remains set to further grow substantially. There was another report which said that if we invest 1 rupee in railway, the outcome in long run will be almost 5 times, that is 5 rupees. So अगर आप 1 रुपया invest करते हो, so long run में you're going to get 5 times return. That is the expectation. So let's see how this is going to change in the coming years. The steadily growing services sector continue to trigger high mobility and demand for passenger travel, generally in the upper classes. Problem क्या होता है? As I mentioned, that railway, the masters or the politicians, they are more concerned about the passenger service, because passenger service railway is carrying around 2 to 2.5 crore, and this is highly subsidized. Remember, highly subsidized. So here railway is losing money. Now India being a poor country, or huge number of people being poor, so railway cannot increase the fare overnight. But what railway can do, they have to look for new avenues of revenue, and so that they can reduce the losses. One is, of course, monetizing the asset. Monetizing means कि आप railway का ही asset use करके you can earn some money. That is, for example, railway land can be given. So let's say there's surplus railway land. Railway and defense, they have highest land under their they have huge number of assets they have, which can be used by the government. So you can monetize the asset. For example, you can give a railway land for lease for, let's say, 10 years or 15 years or 20 years, and here you can get monthly revenue. Similarly, we can operate trains which are for higher class, and you can ask them pay. And remember, people are ready to pay if they get better services. So they would be closer to the airlines. Right now we have high speed Rajdhanis and Shatabdis and Durontos and Tejas. So maybe another way of another option of private players might come into picture in the coming years. Model shift from air to rail. Transfer traffic of rail will depend on reduced journey time, frequency of the rail services, and offering accommodation on demand. One of the problem in railway is that you do not get service on demand. If I want to travel, so I have to plan advance. I have to plan in months, especially on the routes which are heavily in demand. So if I have to take, how can I plan 2 months before my journey? What if I have an urgent demand? So I have to take flights. If we can ensure the railway augments its infrastructure, that on demand वो आपको service provide कर पाए, and that would be the objective. So rail travel needs to appropriately match air and road services in terms of pre-board and on-board convenience, reliability, and speed. And it faces competition from budget airlines, high-capacity buses, and personal cars. Indian Railway needs a craft of concerted strategy to expand, accelerate, and modernize its intercity passenger services. So this is one. One is demand supply. Second is shift from air to rail, and third is reducing transmit time. Why can't we run semi-speed 160 km/h trains? Why it has to take 15 hour, 15 to 18 hour? That is, I'm talking about the fastest train, that is Rajdhani between Delhi and of course Kolkata. If I have to travel from Delhi to Bangalore, I have to wait for it's almost 30-hour journey. So why can't we have high speed train? The best trains, they run at a speed of 110 or 120 kilometers. So we need to increase it to semi speed 160, 200 kilometers, and for that we have to innovate. We have to create new tracks. We have to ensure that existing tracks can take that load. So freight as well as passenger traffic across the network have remained stuck in slow tracks over decades. And the pilot project of IRTC operate Tejas, sets clock virtually the same travel time as older Shatabdis on these routes. So on ongoing completion of two DFCs, dedicated freight corridors. So by December 2021, the contemplated upgradation of existing Delhi Mumbai and Delhi Kolkata rail route will see trains running at 160 km/h. So ये जब dedicated freight corridor will be ready, so all the load of the freight trains will move to the dedicated freight corridor, and this will maybe decongest the network, and this decongested network can be further leveraged. Most other paths with mixed freight and passenger trains jostling for space and constrained by speed limit. This will lead to new train set to be substantially underutilized in terms of potential and far below expectation. Okay, so we have to improve the services. Okay, I'll discuss this in the end then. So now question comes in that can it be profitable? Naturally, when they will use the infrastructure of railway, so they're going to pay something to the railway, right? So they will have a certain agreement between them. So they will pay, so there the railway will get revenue. Second is it will generate competition. It is not only about money, it will generate competition between the railway and the private sector. And when the competition will be there, the railway efficiency or service will improve. Okay, so that is the another objective. And the private sector is planning to invest 30,000 crore in the railway sector as per the recent proposal, and this might happen in the coming maybe decade. So 30,000 crore rupees investment will come to railway, and this will further boost the requirement of railway. So these have been the reason why railway is is maybe looking at option of private trains. So it would be like a PPP, public-private partnership, where in the railway and the private is going to have a partnership. Now, but there are certain issues. What are the issues right now? First, one of the biggest issues is regulator. We do not have a regulator. Tomorrow, when the private player and the railway both will compete with each other, so definitely there is going to be a lot of, you can say, problem. There are going to be issues between the players, because right now, if I talk about today, मैं आज की बात करता हूँ, if I talk about today, most of the railway infra is made by private players, but they work like a contractor. So railway give the contract to very big players, and that is how it works. But today, once these train will operate, they will have to work like a partner with each other, and hence we need a strong autonomous regulator, and this regulator will not take a biased approach and will try to create a level playing field for both the private as well as the existing railway. But remember, hardly 3 to 4% of the existing network we are looking at in the coming decade. So we can say with the certainty that railway is not going to change in real sense. It's going to remain same. Only the augmentation of capacity, jo capacity badhega, that might be shared with the private player. It is not without challenge that private train operators will strive to provide value for money to passengers and ensure their profitability environment in a price war. So the absence of autonomous regulator is essential. Experience of licensed container train operators with the railway alone driving policy and settling dispute has not been encouraging. Abhi main kya hu? I am running the railway, I am the operator, I am the regulator also. I am the regulator. Now regulator should be somebody outside autonomous, and hence the regulator bhi hum hi hai, so naturally maybe the justice cannot be given in proper manner, and hence we need a proper regulator. And Vivek Ray Debroy committee again suggested that we need a regulator also. Now, regulator will not only regulate the the issues between the two system, but they will also set the higher limit of fare which trains can be which trains can take. They will standardize the service quality. There will be provision of penalty. All that thing is there. For example, आपने Tejas, if I don't know whether you travel in Tejas or not, but Tejas train has a provision of late fee. Let's say the train gets late now, and you get late. So if the train gets late and you get late, so automatically you know you will get paid for that. Let's say train is late by 1 hour. So there is a provision that will pay you 10% of the fare. So that 10% of the fare will be, credited to your account. So this is how the service efficiency can improve, and service is the most important, thing. Right now, the track of, railways in terms of giving services has been very poor. The second is concessions issue. Now, we have to, ensure that a lot of concession has been given. Now, here 35-year concession will be given, and rapidly evolving technology impacting design contours, customer expectations. So 35-year concession is there, and there are around 100 paths which we might give it to the private player. Okay, private player. 100 path means not all the paths will be used by private player. Private player can run the trains on this. So we'll have to see how things change, and that will happen with time. Okay, so these are the concerns. Now, what are the structural shift in Indian Railways business management? Now, first is the railway need to become a profit, operating a profit, making body. Right now, the operating ratio of railway, operating ratio matlab kya hota hai? I'm telling, operating ratio of railway is around 96.5%, which means that if 100 rupees, the railway ka earning 100 rupees hai, the revenue, 96.5%, goes into operations, which means they just have 3.5% as surplus revenue. Or if you have very limited surplus revenue, which means modernization will impact. And hence we need huge investment in railway from across the sector. And one way is, of course, you have to increase the business of railway. You have to increase the efficiency of the railway. You have to bring competition. You have to monetize asset of the railway. You have to look ways in which railway can generate revenue, because eventually the railway will generate revenue that is good for railway, and that will augment the investment in railway for the future. The long run may, this is what we need to do. The first is you need to segregate the passenger and the freight business. Okay, dono ko standalone business lo. The freight already is in the profit, but the passenger is in the loss. Then because the passenger is subsidized, the freight is costly. Freight ko aap costly kar dete ho, and this is called cross subsidy. So the passenger traffic is one of the cheapest in the world, but the freight cost in India is one of the highest in the world. So that is a big problem. So we need to create model where passenger business is self-sustaining. Second is we need to restructure the tariff rationally and urgently. Abhi hamara tariff bahut kam hai. AC first, AC2, these are in the losses right now. Okay, so these are in their losses. So hence we have to maybe rationalize this thing. Develop terminal infrastructure. Overall, the junction, all that infrastructure has to be built. Leapfrogging the conversion of existing dual use high demand trunk routes to semi high speed corridors. So abhi 100 se leke 160 high speed trains or 200 kilometer, so Vande Bharat, or you must have come across such trains which we are already in the pilot mode. They are working efficiently, but we need not one, we need 100 or 200 such trains, because this is very important for business and economy as well. So this is what the railway is going to change. I hope you got an idea of Indian Railways. Okay, so result is the future path of operation of railway, and it must ensure level playing field for private players, and maybe the efficacy would be tested. So that is the first topic. It was a big topic. The second is Skill India for Atmanirbhar Bharat. Now, a basic question always being asked, that where do we stand today, and how do we make India a self-reliant country? There has always been a focus on Make in India, where we want to develop our manufacturing capacity. But there are two big challenges in the India's poor performance, or you can say underperformance in the manufacturing or industrial sector. One is the lack of skilled laborers. Okay, and the second is the infrastructure. These are the two biggest limitations. What does China have? China has infrastructure, unparalleled infrastructure. The rail, road, connectivity, port, it is massive. It is better than even the developed nations. So that is advantage China have. Today, China accounts for 28% of the world's manufacturing. Can you believe that? अगर world में जो भी manufacture हो रहा है, 28% is happening in China. So that is huge. And we are not even 1/10 of what is happening in China, and that is a big, maybe a cause of concern for each one of us. We need to look inward, and we have to find ways how do we, improve our abilities. So one is of course the infrastructure, as I discussed, railway, rail, port, connectivity, inland waterways, sea route, communication, power, all that will come in the infrastructure, housing. So this is one area where government is already serious. The second is skilled labor. Now we have, in the past 1 decade, government has come with a lot of schemes, National Kaushal Vikas, PM Kaushal Vikas Yojana, National Skill Development, mission, and number of schemes have come. But there is still a huge demand for a skilled labor in India, and we have not been able to create the skilled labor as per the industry requirement and standards. So in this context, recently government, the Prime Minister Modi, he announced that we need, to develop Atmanirbhar Bharat, and here Atmanirbhar Bharat is about self-reliance. And for that, we have to reduce the dependency of import. Whatever we need, हमको जो चाहिए, we need to develop that in India. It has two advantages. First is India has a huge, economy, 135 crore, consumer-driven economy who need things, so we can produce for them. And the second is, of course, we need to create maybe mechanics or maybe opportunities where India can become a base for manufacturing. Okay, so we have all the requisites, maybe elements, because we have a huge population, and that is one. So effects of pandemic are expected to have lasting impact on every sphere of the activity. Considering this impact, India announced Atmanirbhar Bharat to propel country's path on the path of self-sustenance. It has twin objectives, that is short term and long term. So what is short term? First is revive the different spheres of the country in the short term, whatever are the short term areas. For example, maybe maybe manufacturing or other sectors, because Atmanirbhar Bharat is about manufacturing sector. It is about MSME sector, which is broadly linked with manufacturer. Third is the agriculture. The second is general reforms in a lot of areas, ease of doing business. So that is where we need to understand the maybe lacunas or gaps or bottlenecks in the economy, and we have to work on them. Second is insulating India from any future global economic turndown by making it robust in long run. A very good example you can understand in this pandemic crisis. When the pandemic started in India, we were not even producing a single PPE kit. We were not producing an N95 mask. The kind of demand suddenly we saw for sanitizers and the medical equipments we did not have. Maybe ventilators, oxygen masks, a number of things were there. So Indian government took a leadership, took a leap here, and they asked the big manufacturers, and for example, Asian Paints, one of the biggest companies in India in this department. The government, the ministry asked them, that why don't you make sanitizers? And within 15 days, they were able to launch their own version of sanitizer. And today you can see the advertisement in the television. And today we don't have the dearth of sanitizer in India. Today we don't have dearths of N95 masks. We are still importing PPE kits, but we are producing more than 3 lakh PPE kits in India, across India. So that is huge. So whenever there is an opportunity, there is a challenge. It is also opportunity in disguise. So government probably thinks at this point of time that this time is not going to come back, and let's reset things where we are still in lagging, and for that you need massive effort. Yes, Mahindra Group is making ventilators, and that is true, Abhijit, for many other companies also. The companies which were not there in their field, suddenly they took the maybe the leap in certain area, and they started making things, and that is maybe opportunity, and that also shows the ability and resilience of Indian manufacturing sector or the Indian players. We just need to perform, when there is opportunity. So maybe this is an opportunity for each one of us to realize. So Abhyaan seeks to build capacities across sectors and promote local products. Further, it would focus on scaling up manufacturing. Remember, point number 1, scaling up manufacturing, accelerating infrastructure development, and third is attracting investment, and fourth is promoting consumption-led growth. Now, these 4 points are very important, remember. So these points you can directly use in your answers. So first is we have to augment our manufacturing sector so that India becomes a manufacturing base. Second is one of the lacuna is, as I mentioned, is infrastructure. Relatively, we need a better infrastructure. We need highways, superways. We need 8 lanes and 6 lanes and 8 lanes and 10 lanes. We need dedicated freight corridors. We need better transshipment ports. We need connectivity. We need inland waterways. We need seamless integration of all these areas in a structured manner. So that is what we need. The second is, of course, we need money. We need investment. Government cannot bring that money. That money will have to come from private players. That money will have to come from the big MNCs. And remember, MNCs are waiting. They're just looking. MNCs are not coming in India, and even if they're coming, they need to, maybe they need a clarity from government that this is going to sustain. India is a complex country. India has a complex governance as well. We have center, we have state, we have local body, and hence, if maybe a red carpet has to be, put in front of the foreign player MNC, it requires a strong coordination and maybe support from each level of the government, which is a difficult task at times. So we need to attract investment. I'm talking about here FDI, the foreign investment, the investment within the country. The players can take that maybe risk for making investment in the country, but again they need assurance. And the fourth is, of course, we need consumption-led growth. India has a huge population with huge consumption requirement, and this has to be sustained. So this is what Atmanirbhar Bharat is all about. About 65%. Now, what is the one advantage is the youth. Now, why we are talking about skill India or Atmanirbhar Bharat? Because we have a huge population, a youth. Now that youth needs to be skilled. That youth need to be given job, and that is how things are going to change. So about 65% of India's population is below 35 years. 50% is below 25 years. With a huge educated young population, India is uniquely poised to realize its demographic potential. Okay. In fact, the Indians are heading several MNCs show that there is no dearth of knowledge and talent in the country. However, we need to upgrade the skills or upskill the youth to meet the employment needs of the technology-driven 21st century. So, हमें अपने youth को skill करना होगा, and we need to skill as per the modern requirement. For example, today we are talking about fourth industrial revolution. We're talking about automation. We're talking about AI, artificial intelligence. We're talking about machine learning. We're talking about Internet of Things. So, and these are new technologies. These technologies are going to replace things in future, and here we need to invest. We're talking about quantum mechanics. Okay, so n number of new technologies, and they will set maybe future base for 21st century. So there are opportunities and challenges. Pandemic and is seen by many as an opportunity to upgrade the knowledge and acquire new skills. The fourth industrial revolution had triggered a paradigm change in which digital technology drives the job market. The remote working with increasing adoption of digital technology might continue to be a dominant mode of working for the near future. It is estimated that 70% of the world's learners are affected by school closure due to pandemic across education levels. Ab dekho na, the first and second industrial revolution happened in 1750 or between 1850. So India was under British rule. The third revolution happened during the 1970s and 80s. Okay, the internet revolution. Okay, internet. Again, in this period also, India was, maybe India was a closed economy. We had almost no contact from foreign. But today, in the fourth industrial revolution, which we are witnessing, which is nothing but AI, automation, India has all in the dot stick in its favor. We have huge workforce. We have huge, IT industry. We have huge IT-enabled services, and we just need to take advantage. Remember, why Google is investing so much money? Because they know there is a huge potential. Okay, artificial intelligence, machine learning, data science, cloud computing, Internet of Things will be the area of interest for the companies. With people opting for online buying, companies will seek to adopt new online marketing strategies. Another important issue that need to be addressed is ensuring equitable employment through higher participation of women in the workforce. So these are the maybe ways, maybe options of Skill India. We need to move forward. Now, first is what is the way forward? First is local to global. Local means global plus local. So the global demands can be met by local, maybe skills, can be met by local strengths. Okay, so what is the strength? Every place, every part of India has its own strength. So we need to capitalize on that strength. We need to develop that area. So there have been some reassuring development with accent to local. The production of several lakh PPE kits, a collaboration with the automobile industries to produce ventilators, manufacture of more than 70 made in India products by DRDO are just few examples of capability of Indian scientists, IT professionals, and technocrats. So this is what, maybe we need to, we need to, you can say, take advantage. The second is reducing import. Right now we have, almost the imports are more than around $500 billion. This is huge. Almost one-sixth of India's GDP we are imports. So we, whatever we need machines, we need ICs, we need, engines, we need, mobile phones, we need auto parts. Everything is imported, and that is a huge challenge. Why we are importing? Why can't we develop our own capacity? I'm not saying that, we should not import, but if we have the basics in place, why we shouldn't do that? Because we have a huge market. हमें बाहर नहीं बेचना है, हम अगर इंडिया के लिए बना लें, that itself is more than sufficient. So we must aim to gradually reduce imports in the every sector, from crude oil to heavy machinery. This reduction should be based on the locally available resources, talent, skills of human capital. So we, need to take the advantage. Second is, we need to be very globally competitive. Our Indian players, our MSME sector, our Indian players, we have very good example. For example, two-wheeler market. So Indian two-wheeler, players, the manufacturers, they are best in the world. And same is true about the small cars also in India. The small cars, the manufacturers, whether it is Hyundai or Honda, or same, the biggest is of course Maruti. They are among the best in the world. So we need to, maybe ensure that, probably, that replicate the same story in other areas as well. So we have to be globally competitive while remaining vocal about local. We must aim at making Indian products to be globally competitive. And here we need a lot of R&D. Remember, India mein R&D jo hai, we are just 0.7% of GDP. So hardly, and this, most of the R&D is coming from government or public sector. The private sector R&D is very few. Remember, for the first time we are developing a vaccine of this scale. We are having trial in India. So we were mostly dependent on foreign countries for the vaccine, but today we are developing. So I think it is important that we understand India is not anymore a small country. We are a big country. We are the 5th largest economy in the world in terms of, the market value. We are 3rd largest economy in the world in terms of the purchasing power parity. So definitely there is a lot of, things that we can do, and we need to take the advantage of that. So R&D, innovation led, is one area. PSUs and private sector should not only complement but also collaborate wherever feasible. The private sector must massively step up the investment in R&D. PSUs also need to modernize in terms of technology. So this is the area where, we need to, make an effort. Yes. To remain globally competitive, a well-assured future, we need to focus on 3S. Okay, we need skills, of course. We need scale, which means you need to, if you can make ventilator, make on a large scale. We need speed also. There is a time bound, aspect is there. One reason why China is different, or why China has been so strong, because China has done tremendously well in the basics, the government policies, the infrastructure, the ease of doing business, all is something which is their favor. And they do not have a complex, bureaucracy like in India, where you need approval and you need so much things. The government, if it decides something, the bridges that we make in 2 years and 3 years, they make in 6 months. Okay, and so we need to, I'm not saying that, we should ape them entirely, because a democracy has its own limitation. But definitely we need to learn from them, and we need to look ways in which how our capacities can be augmented, and that too in a mission mode approach. So India has a potential to emerge as a global hub for providing skilled manpower to other nations, and that is where Skill India is one of the most highly important areas of government's focus. Okay, so that completes Skill India, and I hope you got a very holistic view of what India can do, and where are the problems. Now, Lancet analysis. Now, Lancet is a body. It's a medical body. They come with their own report or medical thing. So, Lancet analysis of population trends in the 21st century. So, they have given that how the population will change. Now, remember, if you remember, I had discussed in the previous class that how population of the country changes. So, this is the time, and this is population. So, population usually changes, and this like this. Okay, so this is like a graph. So this is P1, this is P2, this is, you can say, P3, this is P4, this is P5. So this is the, the population change like this. So as the time increases, population will increase, then it will stabilize, and then so from one stable P1 P2 it moved to second stable state, that is P4 P5. So this is called demographic transition. Country का population कैसे बदलता है, this is a theory. So this is a theory of demographic transition, and it was given by a very famous people, Pearl and Reed. So this is the modern theory. This is how population of any country changes. Now India is here, somewhere here. Okay, India is in the here. Our population is population is increasing, but the growth rate is declining. It is expected that, as per this Lancet report, by that in 2047 we will have a peak population. Okay, after 47 our population will start declining. So all the countries, for example, it could be like this, or it could be like this, or it could be like this, depending on. For example, countries like Italy, Japan, France, all these countries are in this phase where the population is declining. And why population is declining? Because the birth rate are less than the death rate. So 2 people are dying, but only 1.5 children are are being born. So this is the problem that these countries are facing. So India might also face the same future. So this is a theory. You can see TFR. What is TFR? Total fertility rate. So total fertility rate का meaning है that number of children born by a woman in her reproductive cycle. So you can see in the 50s every average woman was having 6 children, and now you can say in here we can see India is somewhere. India is 2.3 right now, which means today an average woman in India, and on average she gives birth to 2.3 child. Okay, and this is going to come down in the coming years, and that is where population is decline. So as this century ends, India may no longer be a country of billions, says a projection that appears online edition of Lancet. The reference forecast for China and India peaked before 2050, and both countries thereafter had a steep declining trajectories. So क्या हो रहा है? The new analysis published in the Lancet has projected that the world population will peak much earlier than previously estimated. It projects the peak at 9.73 billion in 2064. यानी वर्ल्ड का पॉपुलेशन जो है अभी 7 बिलियन है, इट विल इंक्रीज टू 9.73 and that is the peak. उसके बाद population will decline. It is 36 years earlier than the 11 billion projected for 2100 by the United Nations World Population Prospect. For 2100, the new population projects decline to 8.79, which means as per this report, the population will be 8.79, from the 2064. So only time will tell, and probably हम लोग नहीं होंगे देखने के लिए. Okay, we don't know. Okay, so probably some of you have to live more than 100 years, then only this is possible. But who knows? Maybe some new medicine will come, drug will come, and maybe we can live 110, 120, 130 like that. Maybe centuries, half centuries. Okay, so 5 most populated countries as per this. So 2100 में जो projection है, the 5 most populated country will be India, Nigeria, China, US, and Pakistan. Now let's see. So China is 1.4, so it's come down to 732. India is going to be 1.09 billion, and USA and of course Nigeria is 791. Okay, so only time will tell. So, however, these forecasts show different future trajectories between countries. Nigeria's forecast have to be continued population growth to 2100 and was expected to be the second most populous country by then. Now, what are the predictions for India's population? Because this is important. For India, the report projects a peak population of 1.6 billion in 2048 from 1.38 billion in 2017. By 2100, population is projected to decline by 32%. However, meeting UN Sustainable Goal Development Targets, the peak would be earlier and see population decline to 9.9 million. So let's see. Conventional wisdom is that though a decline in population is expected, it is expected to begin only around 1946. यानी 2046 तक हमारा population बढ़ता जाएगा, and then that will peak in 2046 and then it will come down. The fall, according to the latest 2019 assessment of UNDP calculation, is expected to see India's population settle at a little over 1.4 billion. So this probably will be here, and we'll see how after 25 years population of India will change. Now, what are the reasons of fall? The first is, of course, all women globally would have higher access to contraception and education. Now, it is a very common saying is that if a woman is educated, she educates the entire family. And if you want to see what is the progress of society, you need to see the level of progress women have achieved in society. So if women get educated. Right now, the literacy rate of women is very less. As per the latest data, we have around 65% literacy. This 2011. We don't have the current data, but even if let's say it's 75%, still 25% of Indian women are not literate. So if woman is educated and literate, she can decide the size of the family. She will understand the importance of education and health. She will have lesser children, because having child, and bearing child, and taking care of child is, it takes a lot of toll on, health and mind, of women. So if she has fewer children, she can take care of her life better. She can do something for the economy. She can do job. So all these things are something that have to be looked into. So if woman gets higher education, and they will also, educated women will also have more focus on the family planning. This scenario will lead to sharper reduction in the total fertility rate, a metric that shows on average how many children a woman must have to keep replenishing the population. A TFR lower than 2.1 leads to decline in the country's population. So अभी हमारा 2.3 है, and we are expecting that it might come down to 2.1 in probably, let's say, I think next 1 decade we'll see that trend. So that is the Lancet analysis. Now, India's military ties with Pakistan. Now, Nepal. Now, recently, again and again, we are coming across this news, and the recent border dispute, or the Nepal's border claim to India. Now, India and Nepal are two countries who have a very strong historical relations, and one of the reasons is that the Nepalese have access to Indian armies, and the Gorkha regiment, the hilly Nepalese, they are the part of Indian army. So that is why the debate is there. So soldiers from Nepal form a significant part of India's army legendary, the Gorkha regiment. The military ties with Nepal, and how the origin kind of started. The military connection with the Himalayan country goes back to Maharaja Ranjit Singh, whose army in Lahore enlisted Nepalese soldier called Lahure, or Soldiers of Fortune. British India raised first battalions of Gurkha regiment as a Nasiri regiment on April 24, 1815. By the end of First World War started, there were 10 Gurkha regiments in British Indian Army. Okay, when India got freedom, these regiments were divided into British and Indian armies as per British India Nepal tripartite agreement. So when all the Gurkha regiment, so few of them, they became part of the British Army, and the rest became the part of the Indian Army. So 6 Gurkha regiment with a lakh odd soldier came to India, which went on to raise another 11 Gurkha rifles who choose not to transfer to the British Army. Okay, so that is how this has changed over years. Okay, so Sabnam is saying that it was in news that female literacy has reached 87%. Okay, Sabnam, we don't have the data. You can tell me the source from where you got this news, but the best source is of course census. Okay, so in that situation, if women has reached 87, so men must have crossed 90. So that is a good news if that is true, and maybe probably in a year or two we'll come to know. So can Nepali citizens join Indian Army? Yes, any Nepali can join Indian Army, both as Jawan, as an officer. A citizen of Nepal can take ND or CDS exam and join Indian Army as an officer. Colonel Lalit Roy, who received Veer Chakra for his bravery in the battalion, during Kargil War, is one such officer of Nepalese descent. The Nepalese Army also sends his officer for training to India's military academics and combat colleges. So that is true. Does the soldier of Nepal enjoy the same rights as the Indian troop? Yes, they enjoy the same benefit as Indian troops, both during service and after retirement. They get the same medical facility as Indian soldiers. Medical teams from Indian Army tour Nepal. Unlike the British, who started giving Nepalese soldiers pension only a few years ago, Indian Army has never discriminated against Nepalese soldiers who can avail healthcare facilities in India as well. So Indian Army also runs the welfare projects in Nepalese villages, including smaller water and power projects. So this debate, maybe you might have a debate or discussion. So that probably ends here. So yes, this convention dates back to 1972. Honorary Chief to Nepalese Army. So when Field Marshal Sam Manekshaw, a Gurkha regiment, fondly called Sam Bahadur by his troops, was made the honorary chief of Nepalese Army. So India ka jo army chief hai, they are honorary chief of Nepalese Army, and so Army Chief of India is the honorary chief of Nepalese Army and vice versa. Okay, so we have joint exercise like Surya Kiran annual event, and it is an important exercise in terms of security challenges faced by both nations in terms of changing face of global terrorism. The recent politics, between India and China, sorry, India and Nepal, you can say something which is very bad. And I think it is important that India should, put all their effort and bring Nepal closer, because Nepal is not only a country which is close to India's boundary, but Nepal, the Nepalese population have a strong, kith and kin or culture relationship with India. A lot of women in India, they get married in Nepal. The Nepalese, get married in India, and there are no, visiting rights or passport like that. So there is a strong relation, and that needs to be nurtured. It is a huge country with, Hindu population, so that is the cultural part. There is a strong, you can say, bonding between us. But population, somewhere the politics has been, creating problems, and hence we have to, we can say, create mechanism in which India and Nepal come together. So, let's see how things changes. Yes. Now, Afghanistan-Pakistan Transit Trade Agreement. Pakistan has allowed Afghanistan to send goods to India using Wagah border. Okay, so earlier it was not allowed, and recently. So where is Wagah border? That is in Punjab. Okay, just 30 kilometers from Amritsar. Okay, so then Wagah border, and then the Lahore comes in. So the decision is a part of Islamabad commitment under the Afghanistan-Pakistan Transit Trade Agreement. It is a bilateral, APTT is a bilateral. Bilateral means between two countries, signed in 2010 by Pakistan and Afghanistan. It calls for greater facilitation in the movement of goods amongst the two countries. In 2010, agreement supersedes 1965 Afghanistan Transit Trade Agreement, which granted Afghanistan the right to import duty-free goods through Pakistani seaport, most notably Karachi. So, abhi kya hua hai, under this agreement, Afghanistan can, send their goods to India. Okay, can send their goods to India, which means Afghanistan will have that advantage through Wagah border. The trade in goods smuggled into Pakistan once constituted a major source of revenue for Afghanistan. And 2010, after allows both countries to use each other railway, airways, road, port for transit, trade along with the designated transit corridors. The agreement does not cover road transport vehicles from any third country, be it India or Central Asia country. So, क्या हो रहा है इसमें? Under this agreement, Afghanistan trucks access to Wagah border with India, where Afghanistan good will be offloaded into Indian trucks, and this agreement does not permit. अब यहाँ देखो ना, Afghanistan का जो good है that can come to India, but Indian good cannot go to Afghanistan. Okay, so Indian goods cannot go to Afghanistan, so that the Pakistanis have not allowed. So this agreement does not permit Indian goods to be loaded onto the trucks back for transit to Afghanistan. And why is that so? Because the Pakistan want that their goods should be, moving rather. So instead, Afghanistan truck offload in Wagah and may return to Afghanistan loaded with only the Pakistani rather than Indian goods, in attempt to prevent the formation of black market for Indian goods in Pakistan. So maybe this is the probably. So this is the transit agreement. Okay. Now this is a very important news, and you need to understand this Chahabar rail project. Let's understand. So this is India, this is Pakistan, this is Afghanistan, okay, and this is Chahabar port. So there is a Chahabar port, and there's one more port there here called Bandar Abbas. Okay, so Bandar Abbas. So why these ports are important? That we need to understand. Now remember, India and Iran have a very good relationship historically, and because of good relationship historically, India wanted to develop port in Iran, and that port is called Chabar port. Idea is that India wanted access to Afghanistan and thereby access to Central Asia. Right now, India and Afghanistan share a very small, you can say, in a original boundary we do share with little with Afghanistan, but that is a part of Pak occupied Kashmir. So technically we do not share any land with Afghanistan, and Afghanistan is one country where India has made huge presence in the past 1 decade, because India wants that Afghanistan should be stable, and unfortunately Pakistan has been using Afghanistan as their backyard, where terrorism kinds of gets nurtured, and that impacts India's security interests. So India has strong security interests, and further Afghanis have a very they see India in a very good light, and they trust India. and Afghanis don't like Pakistanis. So they have a problem historically. So India sees is a good opportunity where India can, invest in Afghanistan, can develop Afghanistan. That will reduce the, Talibanis or terrorists, probably infiltration in coming years, or maybe the breeding ground of terrorism. And further, if India wants to go to Asia, Russia or some other country in the Central Asia, this route can be there. So there is a Chabar port, and from Chabar port, you can have a train line, and that is called this is Chabar to Jahedan. Okay, so this is the trade corridor. Now this is a train route, and then from Jahedan to, you can say, Jarang. So this 200 kilometers. So this is a road have to be completed. This road will cross Iran, then it will go to Afghanistan. And the third would be the highway, that is Jarang to Delaram. This is a highway which India has already completed in the Afghanistan. Okay. Now, why this is important? Now let's come to one more diagram. Now remember, so this is India, and this is, if I have to reach here. So what is my current route? I have to go like this. I have to go with, this is Red Sea, this Gulf Suez Canal, and I have to go with the entire Mediterranean. Then I have to take this route, and eventually I'll reach Russia. So this, if I take this route, and this route will go to Chabar port, Afghanistan, Azerbaijan, and this, so I will be able to develop, and this is called, moment I cross Afghanistan, I'll be able to connect a new route called International North-South Transport Corridor. So instead of the standard route, I can take this route, and this is 7,200 kilometer. You can say a route which needs to be developed, and India, Russia, Iran, all the countries are, you can say, are trying to develop this. But there have been, the pace has been very slow, and because I remember when I was preparing for UPSC in 2009-10, I was reading the same thing, and I'm teaching you the same thing. So not much has changed since then. India has made effort, but there have been some real problems. Now, what has been the problem? Why we could not leverage the infrastructure? There are multiple reasons. The first is we have to develop infrastructure in some other countries, so they need approval, all those things. The second is huge amount of revenue or infra requirement is there. Okay, that is maybe in terms of investment that is needed. The third is, of course, Iran and USA. They have very tumultuous, or you can say poor relations. And Iran is a country which has been accused of harboring, or you can say developing rather, nuclear weapon. So that is why USA has been putting a sanction on Iran, and because of this sanction, Iran is not able, or you can say Iran is not able to do global trade. Iran is not able to get investment. Okay, so if India has to purchase oil from Iran, there is a sanction from America, and that sanction does not allow us to invest in Iran. So that is one reason. Second is investment, global trade. The second is investment. If you want to do that, the companies they feel that if you invest in Iran, they might be blacklisted by USA. USA is the largest economy of the world. They are bully also. Remember, when they want to do something, they will go ahead and do anything. So it's not only the China is bully. Of course, China is now a new bully, but even USA is a bully. They're not small bully, but they do it in a little more sophisticated manner, you can say. So because of that, Iran and India's relations have are kind of getting impacted. And whatever India wants to do in Iran in terms of investment, in terms of purchasing their oil, and all that is getting impacted. Now Iran understands this. Iran understands this, that this is a concern which India cannot overlook, and India also have a very good relationship with the USA and other countries. So India is probably maybe taking a very cautious approach on the entire issue. So this is a problem, but the only question is that how long Iran is going to wait. Iran is not going to wait, and suddenly there was a news that Iran government has decided to proceed with the construction of Chabar rail project on its own, citing delays from Indian side in funding and starting the project, because India said that we'll fund the project. 4 years ago, India and Iran signed an agreement to construct a rail line from Chabar to Jahedan along the border of Afghanistan. The Iranian railway will proceed without India's assistance, using approximately 400 million from Iranian National Development Fund, and this Development comes as China finalizes a massive 25-year, $400 billion strategic partnership deal with Iran, which could cloud India's plan. Now remember, China has a very common, very simple strategy: contain India to South Asia. They do not want India to grow. They have a problem with India. They do not want that India should take, have a good relation. So they are trying to, disturb all the relationship of India have with other countries. And China is a big economy now. They have resource, they have money. They are the big manufacturing country. They have huge amount of dollar. Their own currency is also international currency. So every country which is relatively underdeveloped, they need money, they need resources, and China promises them. But remember, China is not like India, or China have a very poor track record. They are mostly involved in business. Even if they invest in a country, they will try to use that for their own strategic needs. For example, many of the countries claim, or the international experts claim, that the areas where in the countries where China has made investment, if there is a problem tomorrow, they might use those countries or ports for the using them as a military base. So these have been the concern, and especially India and Indian neighbors are something China is looking more at. So Pakistan and China are naturally all with a friend, but same is true with they are trying to make investment in Sri Lanka. They are trying to make investment as in Myanmar, in Bangladesh, and they are trying to foray in Indian Ocean, in Maldives, and whichever area. Okay, and they earlier that issue is not discussed, but there was a concept called string of pearls. So this string of pearls was a containment India strategy. Now this is no more applicable now, and now they are building a new concept called Belt and Road Initiative. And this Belt and Road Initiative is an ambitious project and is the vision project of Xi Jinping. So Xi Jinping is the president of China since 2012, and after Mao Zedong. Who's Mao Zedong? Mao Zedong is the you can say the founder of the Chinese, right, the communist China. So after Mao Zedong, he is the only person who Mao Zedong was the maybe head of China till the time he died, from 1949 till I think 1976. So he was there, mostly like a super boss of China. But after Mao Zedong, every person who came who ruled China, they ruled only for 2 terms. But Xi Jinping has become a third person after Mao Zedong. There was one more person called Deng Xiaoping, the third most powerful person in the history of China, and he has he is going to rule China till the time he dies. So this 2-term is no limit, is no more, does not apply on him. So he wants to project China as a strong nation, as an armed nation, as a muscle policy. That is what the aim is. So they are trying every which way, and of course they have a problem with India. India has a strong can say history with China as well. So these are the problems which India might have to be ready for that. So Jabar Road project, it is a 628 Chabar Jahedan line which will be extended to Jarang along the border of Afghanistan. The project was supposed to be completed by March 2022. It was meant to be part of India's commitment to the trilateral commitment with India, Iran, and Afghanistan to build alternate route to Afghanistan and Central Asia. So Central Asia is ultimately the objective. But question is that why did Iran omit India from the project? Now, despite several site visits by engineers, preparation by Iranian railway, India never began the work, ostensibly due to worries that these could attract US sanctions. US has provided sanction waivers for Chabar port and the railway for Jaidan, but it has been difficult to find equipment supplier partners due to worries that they could be targeted in the US. So Indian Railway, the one body is called IRCON. Okay, there's a PSU of railway. It develops railway infrastructure. So IRCON is one. There are other bodies also. I think maybe India is maybe just looking for better options, but we don't know. India has already zeroed out its oil imports from Iran due to US sanctions. So import, remember, the Iran was one of the biggest country of oil import as well. But because of US sanction, we can't take oil from them as well. So these are the problems which Iran is facing right now. Now, the recent partnership with China is maybe a new thorn in the entire process. Okay. Now remember, China is a different country. China is not a country which is going to worry much what USA says. Unlike India, things are different for us because हमारे लिए problem ये है that if if we say no, maybe America, China can afford to say no to America, but that is not true with with us, and hence we have to be very cautious. But the problem here is that China is trying to poke its nose in every relationship in India has. So Iran and China are close to finalizing 25-year strategic partnership, which will include Chinese involvement in Chabahar duty-free zone and in an oil refinery nearby, possibly a larger role in the Chabahar port as well. So Chabahar port is it's a port which has huge potential, and Chabahar port का एक और advantage है. This is Chabahar port, remember, and this Chabahar port is near. There's a port in Pakistan called Gwadar port. Gwadar port is in the Balochistan province of Pakistan, and यहाँ से Gwadar port से there is a whole it's like that. It goes like this, and it passes through Pak-occupied Kashmir, and this is called China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. So this is a $40 billion project, which right now it is a mix of rail, road, और इससे क्या होगा? China will have access to Indian Ocean automatically. So our presence here will at least maybe insulate the presence of Chinese here, because here automatically comes closer. Another aspect of this Chabahar port is that Chabahar port is just around, you can say, 1,000 kilometers from, you can say, this the Kandla port of Gujarat. So this is so close, and you have access to not only Afghanistan but also the Central Asia. And Central Asia is a place. Central Asia is rich with energy. Central Asia is rich with energy, and India is an energy deficient country. So right now, to bring resources from Central Asia is very costly, because you have to take all the route from Mediterranean, Suez Canal, and then you go to Europe, and then from Europe you go there. Because one country which can give access is Pakistan, which is not going to allow. Another is China, which China is also not going to allow. So the only option is, of course, we make a relationship with Iran, and we do that. So this is the problem. So cooperation with China and Iran will extend from investment in the infrastructure, manufacturing, upgrading energy, transport facilities, refurbishing port, refineries, and other installation. It is also rumored that Chabahar port will be leased to China, surpassing India. India has proposed a tie-up port of Gwadar and Chabahar last year, and that has offered interest to China in the Bandar-e-Jask port, 350 kilometers from Chabahar, as well as Chabahar duty-free zone. So let's see how things go. Only time will tell. Now, India-Iran partnership over Chabahar port. In 2016, India signed a deal with Iran's entailing 8 billion investment zone in Chabahar port and industries in the Chabahar special economic zone. This is developed as a part of transit route to Afghanistan and Central Asia. India has already built 200 kilometers road connecting Afghanistan with Iran. All this were expected to bring cargo to Bandar Abbas port and Chabahar port and free Kabul from its dependence on Pakistan and reach to the outer world. So abhi kya hai? Unfortunately, even Afghanistan has a dependency on Pakistan, which is also going to reduce if we are able to develop this. Completion of this project would give India access to Afghanistan, beyond to Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, Russia, and Europe via 1,700 kilometer long multimodal north-south transport corridor. Okay, so international north-south transport corridor जो है हमें access मिलेगा. Okay, but this is the international transport. Okay, north-south transport corridor. So मुझे यहाँ पहुँचना होगा तो I can just go easily. I don't have to take this route, and it is said that average 2,500 savings will happen on every 15 ton of cargo, because India did a dry run, एक dry run करके test किया था कि what is going to the cost. So it is expected that India is going to save $2,500 savings on the freight on 15 tons, every 15 ton. Okay, so these are the advantages which might have, but I don't see. I think India will have to take a very strong maybe approach here. Okay, so that completes this. So most of the important news of this week have been completed. Now small news are there, so let's take them each one by one. First is Pragyata, guidelines for digital education. You must have come across the news in the past few days where Ministry of HRD has said that the digital education for school children, there are certain guidelines. Those guidelines का नाम है Pragyata guidelines on digital education through online medium. So there are 8 steps of online digital learning. One is of course the plan, review, arrange, guide, talk, assign, track, and appreciate. These guidelines have been developed from the perspective of learners with focus on online blended digital education. So एक तो online learning है, and blended. These are new terms that are enriching us. Okay, for students who are presently at home due to lockdown. अभी world का 70% of the school students, a little more, are right now under some or other kind of lockdown. So कोई ना कोई lockdown है, and hence the education is impacted heavily. Okay, so what are the Pragyata guidelines? It provides a roadmap or pointers for carrying forward online education to enhance the quality of education. The guidelines will be relevant and useful for diverse set of stakeholders, including school heads, teachers, parents, teacher educators, and students. It stresses upon the use of alternative academic calendar of NCERT. So, NCERT का syllabus, government, has given the notification to schools that up 30% reduce the syllabus for both learners having access to digital devices and learners having limited access or no access. Okay, so what are the 3 modes of online education? First, people who have access to online, like people like you, who have computer or smartphones, internet is there. Second is partially have online mode. Okay, so maybe in regular internet is not there. And third is the online mode. Okay, so if the offline mode wale hain, inke liye television and radio should be the source. But let's see how things, maybe probably in the coming 2-3 months, we might see schools opening again. Okay. The guidelines outline suggestions for administrators, school heads, teachers, parents, and students in the following areas. Need assessments. You can read it. Okay. Again, these are nobody going to ask them in the exam, but these are just guidelines given. So Pragyata guidelines of online education on digital education. So pre-primary, the class cannot be more than 30 minutes. Nursery, LKG, class 1st to 8, not more than 30-35. 2 sessions ho sakte hain at the max. And 9 to 12 can have 4 sessions of 30 to 45 minutes. Okay. There are guidelines for parents as well, do's and don'ts. Okay, you can read them. Again, this is just a mere guideline, so we don't need to. Now, this news is important. This news says that Google is going to invest in India, and that investment is a tune of $10 billion, and this is going to happen in the next 5-7 years. Now, why India? Because India is future. Remember, India has huge opportunity. 5 years ago, number of people in India who had access to internet, that was just 15 crore or 150 million, and today it is 650 million. Can you believe that? 650 million of India's population, they have access to internet, and the average monthly usage of the internet is 12 GB. Okay, so this is the new India, and so the business, the education, the health, e-education, tele-education, tele-health, and you can think of n number of things which might happen tomorrow. And India is also a country with huge diversity. So this Google is maybe going to invest, and they're going to take advantage of the digitalization. Now remember, Google is a private company, so they're going to invest only if they see there's a profit here. Okay, so Google is going to invest in India and 10 billion as a part of Google for India Digitalization Fund. The GADIF focuses on digitizing the economy, building India first product and services. जो product and service होगा वो India specific होगा. For example, right now, there are so many languages in India, so they can have a specific product for Indian languages. The plan is in line with India's big tech bullish outlook on India. Earlier this year, Amazon said it will invest an additional 1 billion in India. This is followed by another investment of around 5.7 billion by Facebook in Reliance Jio. So Reliance Jio भी invest कर रहा है Reliance Jio में. Last month, sorry, Facebook is also investing in Reliance Jio. Last month, Microsoft Venture Fund M12 said that it would open office in India to pursue investment opportunities, focusing business to business software startup. So all the digital companies, Amazon, Facebook, Google, they're going to make investment, and India is a big place. Now, what are the areas of investment? Ye points yaad rakhiega. There are 4 areas of investment. Enabling affordable access and information to every Indian in their own languages, which means the vernacular language will be focused. Second is building products and services that are deeply relevant to India's unique needs. Third is empowering business in the digital transformation journey. And fourth is leveraging technology and AI for social good areas like health, education, and agriculture. So these are the 4 areas of investment, and time will tell how Google is going to, maybe change these things. Okay, so that completes this news. Now, a HOPE mission, a new airspace mission, is launched by UAE, and this launch has happened from Japan. So UAE has launched first mission to Mars, remember, and has been delayed by 2 days due to bad weather, and this has happened from Japan. So this is the Emirates Mars mission. You can see the launch is happening, and then it's going to go in the orbit of Mars. Mars को decaying planet भी बोला जाता है. So it's a decaying planet. So the idea is to understand the maybe astronomical phenomena and why things are changing. So that will give insight to the future. Emirates Mars mission called HOPE was announced on 15 with the aim of creating mankind's first integrated model of red planet's atmosphere. So it is a 1500 kg satellite which carries scientific instruments mounted on one side and exploration imager with high resolution camera. So ये क्या करेंगे? The spacecraft will orbit the Mars. They will take photographs. They will understand and maybe measure the various parameters. They collect data on the Martian climate dynamics, which should help scientists to understand why Mars is decaying into space. So this is the HOPE mission. इसमें आपको सिर्फ ये रखना है that HOPE mission is UAE mission, and who are the countries who have reached Mars. So India is one country, UAE is another country. Maybe launch mission अभी पहुंचेगा, then we'll see. Then you have USA is another country. So maybe we need to know which countries have already made mission to Mars. So यहाँ पे you can get an MCQ in the prelims examination. Once it launches, HOPE will orbit Mars for 200 days, and then it will enter in the Mars orbit, coinciding with 50th anniversary of founding of UAE. Okay, so this is the new news is there. You can read it. Now, India's voluntary national review of SDG. What are SDG? SDGs are, you can say, sustainable development goals. And ye goals is by UN. So United Nations Development Program, they have come this goal, and this goal period is from 2015 to 2030. And this is given to different countries, and different countries will put maybe give with the feedback that how these goals are there. So there are total 17 goals, and there are total 169 targets. And these 17 goals, like for example, goal number 1, maybe hunger-free world, goal number 2, health, like that. So there are 17 goals, and these goals are the goals for developing the world, and every country should make a target and will try to reach them. But question is that why there should be UN goal which we should be following. Now remember, United Nations as a body came in 1945, and one of the objective of United Nations is global peace, development, collaboration, effort, addressing issues like global poverty, global hunger, global health, environment conservation, housing. So that has been the concern. The only problem is that UN does not have fund, and even if it has a fund, probably that fund is limited. So in the last few decades or 3 decades, the first started in 2000. When the new millennium came, they came with the concept of MDG, Millennium Development Goals. Or ye MDG goals they set for all the countries, and India was also one of the country. And India has been the founder member of UN. Hence, India has been one of the strong members of UN. Hence, we have to take the lead. So, Niti Aayog ne kya kiya? Niti Aayog has given a national review voluntarily that this is what we are doing, and what are we going to do in the next 10 years, and how we are going to reach the SDG goals as put by the United Nations. So Niti Aayog has recently presented India's second voluntary national review at the UN High Level Political Forum on SDG, Sustainable Development. So it is a foremost international platform for follow-up and review of progress of the 17th SDG goals It meets annually in July for 8 days under auspices of Economic and Social Council of the UN. आपने सुना होगा, Prime Minister Modi also gave the speech here. VNR presented by member states of HLPF are critical component of review of the progress and implementation of the 2030 agenda and the SDG. The reviews are voluntary and state-led and are aimed at facilitating the sharing of experiences, including success, challenges, and lessons learned. So every country should take, on these goals, they should allocate resources and revenue, and here UN can also support them and help them. Niti Aayog prepared and presented India's first VRN in 2017, and the report is about comprehensive account adoption of implementation of 2030 agenda. So ये 30 से तक हमको ये, for example, hunger-free India. For example, IMR should be very less, infant mortality rate, or maybe urbanization we're going to make so many houses, or poverty is going to be zero. So such targets which are there. So these targets somewhere also talk about equality, welfare, and justice in society. So India's VNR this year has undertaken a paradigm shift in terms of embodying whole of society approach in letter and spirit. Apart from presenting a review of progress of 17 SDG, the report discusses, you can read it, okay, what exactly leveraging science, technology, innovation. Now there are two things if India has to meet these SDG goal. One is revenue, that is the budget, the money that we need, and second is of course we need a lot of technology or technological solution or innovation. So the problem is that now West feel that India is no more a small country, and hence probably you cannot expect budget or money, but definitely we need to collaborate in terms of technology so that India can find specific Indian solutions. What will work in US or what will work in Western country or their model will not work. We have to find our own innovative solutions, and then only things are going to change for us. Okay, so consultations, cooperative and competitive federalism. So थोड़ा heavy है, okay, घबराना नहीं. We'll understand once the polity understanding is better. So here they are saying that how center and state together, can compete and they can cooperate as well. For example, let's say we have to improve housing in India through smart cities. So developing smart city is one of the goal of India. So there are already 100 smart city. Not smart city means not that you will change this whole city, but smart city is about developing smart solutions. And these solutions are technology driven solutions. For example, use of technology, use of automation, and they will probably ease people's life in those cities. So if there are 100 cities and these are some in 28 states, so all the cities can compete. They can compete among themselves. आपस में compete करेंगे. And this is going to create a probably model competition among each of them. So that is how. Similarly, let's say a smart city come with a new, maybe innovation or concept. So others can also, we can say learn from them, cooperate with them. So that is what cooperative and competitive federalism is. So different states or different subunits of India, which are different states, are going to compete among each of them, and they're going to cooperate as well. Then you are looking for localized solution. So what is working in Kerala might not work in UP, and what is working in UP might not work in Kerala. So we need local solutions for, for the local problems, and then only things are going to change. Improve state capacity. Now here state capacity means the government capacity, and this government capacity is about how government can improve their abilities and find solutions for the problems. Let's say food security is there, or poverty elevation is there. Okay, so how do we make the backward areas better, or how do we improve that? So here you need to develop state capacity, and state capacity, I believe it is two level. First is the resources, अभी वहाँ mentioned नहीं है, but the one is the resources, and second is the kind of coordination or team that you have. So resources is definitely one thing, but secondly is how well the team and the leadership thing is available to you. Okay, so you can see there are some solutions: the ranking of districts, sensitization, indicator framework, data ecosystem. So abhi रहने दो, ये थोड़ा heavy है. Probably when I'll be discussing the social issues and SDG goal, probably then we'll discuss this in detail. So India's global to local key steps to localization of SDG in India. See, we can't expect the countries to come and help us. We have to find our own solutions, and that is what Niti Aayog is a very is a, you can say it's a think tank of India, and they have a strong research body. So they are looking at innovation models, and they are asking the state to implement those innovations. Okay, so that completes the this thing. Then there is a temple verdict by Supreme Court, and this Supreme Court temple verdict says that reversing the 2011 Kerala High Court decision, the Supreme Court upheld the right of Travancore royal family to manage the property of deity of Sri Padmanabha Swami temple in Thiruvananthapuram. Now this temple, you must have seen this temple in images. This is one of the very rich temple in terms of resources. And earlier this temple, the property, everything, management was controlled by the Travancore royal family. But now a lot of people had the objection to that, and because in India most of the temples, the resources, they are many a times managed by the government of India. So so the Kerala High Court said that now Supreme Court, Kerala High Court said that now the management can be done by uh, the government, but now here the Supreme Court has said no, the management can be done by the Travancore royal family. Now, what has the apex court said? It said that court, as per the customary law, the Shebit rights, the right to manage financial affairs of the deity, survive with the members of the family even of the death of the last ruler. The ruling ends the legal battle of temple, and the members of the royal family have fought with the government for decades over control of one of the richest temple of the world. The central legal question was whether the heirs of last ruler of the Travancore could claim the ruler of Travancore after death. So, जो last ruler की death हुआ, now we do not have a system of monarchy now. So the question was that can a ruler, so-called the previous ruler, if he dies, can it be passed on to the next generation or not? The court examined this claim with a limited meaning of that term according to the Travancore Cochin Hindu Religious Institutions Act to claim ownership, control and management of the ancient temple. So ये सारा verdict दिया, decision लिया, and eventually the verdict came in the favor of the Travancore royal family. Now let's go a little in the history and try to understand the problem. All the temples which were under the control and management of the erstwhile princely states of Travancore and Cochin were under the control of Travancore and Cochin Devasam boards before 1947. However, as per the instrument accession signed, the administration of Padmani Samana was vested in the ruler of Travancore, and the state of Kerala was carved out in 1956, but the Kerala continued to be managed by the erstwhile royals. तो ये already चल रहा था, but in 1971 इंदिरा गांधी ने क्या किया? इंदिरा गांधी passed 24th constitutional amendment, and in this constitutional amendment she abolished the privy purses. Privy purses क्या होता है? So when India got independence, so 550 जो आपके रजवाड़े थे, the small the states, all of them got integrated in India. In return, government of India said that we'll pay you something. So we'll pay you from the from the government treasury, but like a revenue and some rights. For example, you can maintain your own some property, or you can maintain your own, like maybe your some area like that. So private purses, but Indira Gandhi abolished the private purses of the former royals, and were abolished through a constitutional amendment stripping entitlements and privileges. So now after 71, ये जितने भी रजवाड़े थे, the rich, all of the rights were taken back, and that changed the dynamics. So similarly here, the move was upheld in 1993 court, and the last ruler of Travancore, who died during the pendency of this case, continued to manage the affair of the temple till then. In 1991, when the last ruler brother took over the temple management, it created a furor among devotees who moved the court, leading to the long-drawn legal battle. Okay. Now, is the temple property of the royal family? The character of the temple was recognized as a public institution governed by statute. Statute means law. The argument of the royal family is that the temple management would vest with them for them perpetuity as per the custom. Okay. Even though the last ruler executed the detailed will bequeathing his personal properties, he had not included the Sri Padmani temple as his personal property or dealt with as per his will. But in short, kuch bhi ho, the short is that this verdict has given, in the favor of the, the family, and probably it will open a new debate where India is a country of temples, huge temples with huge resources, and maybe the control might be questioned again in future. So let's see how things go. Okay, so What impact does ruling have? The process of opening the vault has led to the discovery of treasure within the this temple, prompting a debate who owns the temple property and how it should be regulated. Despite being a secular country that separates religion from the affairs of the state, Hindu temples that sets are governed through laws and boards heavily controlled by the state government. The system came into being mainly through development of a legal framework to outlaw untouchability by treating temples as public land. That resulted in many legal battles. तो ये सारा जो है reality है. So maybe we'll see how this verdict would change the other temple rulings we might have. Because अगर Supreme Court का कोई ruling आता है, there's a ruling of Supreme Court that would act as a precedent for other ones, precedent for new years. Okay. So this is the news. Now Tangams. What are Tangams? So Tangams are some critically endangered group. So Tangam is nothing but it's a tribal group which lives in Arunachal Pradesh, and recently it was in news. Why? Because Tangam is a little known community within larger Adi tribe of Arunachal Pradesh, reside in the hamlet of Kuging in the upper Siang district of Pandim Circle. The community population is just 2000 spread over 25 villages, but recently उनका जो language है, that language has become critically endangered. Okay, so the survey has revealed that Tangam is now considered only in one village with only 253 reported speakers. As per UNESCO World Atlas of Endangered Languages, Tangam, an oral language that belongs to Tani group under the Greater Tibeto-Burmese language family, is marked as critically endangered. So, which means there are only 253, people who speak, and that too, these spoken is there's an oral language. Okay, that means they don't have a dialect, and so one of the maybe one of the debate always has been that we need to preserve the ancient languages, the ancient maybe the cultures, and if a language is lost, a culture is lost. And maybe when the new generation comes in, they tend to adopt to the new. For example, we are speaking English and we are learning English, so probably we are maybe forgetting Hindi or the pure Hindi which were supposed to be was spoken by our the elders or this thing. So here the focus is how do we revive this, maybe at least have a data information for that. Kuging, why are only few speakers? Kuging is a place, a village, surrounded by a number of villages inhabited by Adi subgroups such as Simongs, Mingyongs, as well as Buddhist tribal communities as Khamba, among others. Abhi prelims mein kaisa sawal aayega? In prelims, they might ask about these tribals. So because these tribals are in news, you might get questions here. To communicate with their neighbors over here, Tangams became multilingual, speaking not only Tangam but other languages like Simong, Khamba, and Hindi. They rarely speak their own language now, since their population is restricted to a single village. Moreover, the Tangams are relatively unknown even in their own state. Okay, so they are speaking, the new generation is speaking some other languages, hence they are forgetting. The village lack proper infrastructure in all the basic sectors of education, health, drinking water facilities, and roads have reached Kongo only in 2018. Not a single person from the community has gone to university. So this is also a data. Okay, so why are language at risk? Why? Because of maybe the bigger languages, the link languages they are replacing. So Hindi is a link language, English is a link language, Assamese is probably a better link language, because if you know these languages, you can communicate, you can do business, you can move, you can study. Many believe that this shift has led to the loss of native languages in the tribal community. Remember, Northeast is hundreds of tribal groups, hundreds of tribal culture, language, belief system, and hence it is very important that we somehow try to preserve them. Okay, even the numerically larger tribes such as Nisi, Galo, Mishmi, Tangsa, whose population exceed the 10,000 mark, are also not safe from endangerment and hence marked unsafe. The younger generation of these tribes, especially in urban areas, are mostly disregarded the use of their mother tongue. So this is important. Okay, Tangams, ethno-linguistic study of critically endangered group of the Arunachal Pradesh. Now, so these are Polynesia, remember. So this is Australia, this is the Pacific Ocean, these are Polynesia, and there are many islands. And these small islands have some population or inhabitants. Now, why it has been news? Because a certain research has come and it shows that the population residing in these area, how they reached here, okay, how they were able to reach. Because remember, we are talking about these people who are living here, they have a history of thousands of years, and there, the discussion kind of started that what is their origin. And it is believed that their origin is either coming from this space or this part of the world. So how does Polynesian people come to live on the far-flung island at the Pacific? And the question has intrigued the researchers for centuries. Norwegian explorer Thor Heyerdahl, brought the topic to public attention, where he sailed the balsa wood raft called Kon-Tiki from Peru to Polynesia in 1947. His goal was to demonstrate that such voyages were possible, supporting theories linking Polynesian origin to America. So, जो Polynesian जो islands हैं उसमें जो लोग रह रहे हैं, they are linked to America. The decades of research in archaeology, linguistics, and genetics now show that Polynesian origin lie to the west, ultimately in the islands of South Asia. Okay, so that is the reality. Okay. A new study published in the Nature report genetic evidence of Native American history in several Polynesian population. So उनको American DNA का उसमें aspect मिला है, that is the population have American DNA, which means the people must have moved from America, the Native America, the Red Indians probably, to this place. Okay, so Rui Napa, also known as Easter Island, is a part of Polynesia closest to South America. So ये news में आ सकता है. So where is Rui Napa? So they might give a MCQ here. Okay, so whenever you read news, try to look for the questions. So what is your assignment today? After today's class, open the atlas and look for this place in the atlas. Okay, this suggests the Ameri Indian genetic component was likely to be introduced later by Chilean colonists. So just look for, so Polynesia kahan hai, where are these islands, and you might be confused here if you do not know. Okay, so Rapa Nui. Okay, so there's one more, Mont Blanc. Mont Blanc is a glacier in French Alps, and it has been news because it is melting. Okay, so it's a melting, which means it's a concern, and it's somewhere here. You can see the glacier in Alps. It's the second highest mountain in Europe after Mount Elbrus, and it is the highest mountain in the Alps and the Western Europe. Almost 4,800 above sea level, it is ranked 11th in the world in the topographic prominence. The mountain stands at the range of Grain Alps between the region of Aosta Valley, Italy, and Savoy and Haute Savoy, France. It is the tallest peak in Alps and highest summit in the Western Europe, and is also called as the roof of the Europe. So this Mont Blanc, could be in news. Just check Mont Blanc also where it is, which are the countries nearby. Okay, you can again you can get MCQ here. You must be thinking that why we are reading these current issues. We are reading these current issues because you have to make the list of such issues, and if the questions come tomorrow, they might come from here. So most of the UPSC questions, they mainly come from the issues which are in news. So the questions are very likely, if you make a list of such item, probably some 200 news could be there like that, and I would assure you that you will easily get around 8 to 10 questions from there. But UPSC is not going to ask direct questions. They might ask you something in between the lines, and hence little thoroughness is required when you're preparing these topics. Okay, so there's Mont Blanc in news. Now coming to a species in news called Sistrum nocturnum. So Nilgiri, where is Nilgiri? Nilgiri is in Tamil Nadu and Kerala. Okay, so Nilgiri Hills, mainly in Tamil Nadu, Kerala. Officials are restoring native Sola habitat. So Nilgiri Hill, there are Sola forest, very famous Sola forest. जब आप natural vegetation पढ़ोगे, then you will understand natural vegetation. Overrun by invasive species called Sistrum nocturnum. अब ये invasive species क्या होते हैं? Let's understand. Now, invasive species could be flora or fauna. Flora means the plant or the animal who they invade. So they, let's say this this species is from Africa, and when this species is from Africa, so every species have their own natural predator. उस area में उनका एक natural predator होता है, which kills them, and the cycle is get maintained. But let's say when I bring this species or a plant or an animal to Indian Ocean or Indian forest, so the new species, the new tree or new animal might become invasive, and they might kill the other species there by due to maybe, if I talk about plants, they might kill it by maybe increase in the growth of that species. For animals or fish, the fish can consume the other fish, and they will disturb the local ecosystem, and that is very important. Kai bar species, they also come through ships. Okay, they come through ships. For example, you must be knowing that this is a, let's say there's a big ship. So in this ship, there is a ballast channel where you keep water, and this water is used for balancing. So this seawater. So let's say this ship is coming from Atlantic. It is coming from USA, Atlantic, and it is coming from USA. The water in this is coming from USA. Doing this, maybe it might have कोई वहाँ का local fish इसमें आ गया होगा. And now the ship comes to Indian Ocean, and they replace this ballast, and they replace this water. I mean, they replace this ship. This fish might come to Indian Ocean, और वो Indian Ocean जो आपका fish है, वो आके हमारे local ecosystem को disturb कर सकता है, and that is how invasive species are. So ये invasive जो species होते हैं, they have to be controlled. Otherwise, they will disturb the local ecosystem. They might create a new problem. So this Seastrum nocturnum is commonly known by names as night blooming jasmine and रात रानी. Okay, तो आपने देखा भी होगा रात की रानी. You get very but they grow at a very fast pace. It is native to West Indies but naturalized in South Asia. Its spread is threat to all shola forest and grassland habitats, and it does not allow any native flora to survive. क्योंकि इतना तेजी से grow करता है that other plants are not able to survive. The plants, unless completely removed from their roots, keep sprouting and keep taking over shola and the native grassland. Shola forests are very famous forests, and they are very important for the local habitat. Okay, so I believe you must have understood about the invasive species. Now, Male Ghat Tiger Reserve. So where this Male Ghat Tiger Reserve is in Maharashtra. So Maharashtra CM has sought alternative routes for proposed broad gauge conversion for railway line passing through Male Ghat Tiger Reserve in Amravati district. So Amravati district is in Maharashtra. So it is a part of Satpura Maika landscape and was among the first 9 tiger reserve notified in 1774 as a Project Tiger. Okay. The Tapti River, ये important है, Tapti River and Gawailgarh Ridge of Satpura range form the boundary of the reserve. Okay, so this is very important news because you might get MCQ. The forest is tropical, dry, deciduous in nature, dominated by teak. The reserve is catchment area for 5 major rivers: Kandu, Kapra, Sipna, Kadga, Dolar, and all these rivers are tributaries of river Tapti. Okay, so this is Malghat Tiger Reserve. इसको check कर लीजिएगा कहाँ पर है. Where is Amravati district? Now there are 2 Amravati. One Amravati is in Arunachal Pradesh as well. Okay. Now Pakistan and India have signed an agreement of 700 megawatt Azad Patan Hydel power project on the Jhelum River. So Jhelum River is the east. It's a tributary of Indus. Have signed agreement for 700 megawatt Azad Patan Hydel project, और ये कहाँ पर है? In Pak occupied Kashmir, and this is made with the help of China. Okay, everybody is mute, right? Who is not mute? Okay, my voice, is there any disturbance, guys? It's okay, right? Actually, my dog, is creating some problem. Okay. Better now. Okay. Fair enough. Chalo. So this Ajat, this is last news, just 2 minutes, 5 minutes will go over. Ajat Patan Hydel project. So this Adar Pachat Hydel project kahan par hai? It is on the Jhelum river in the POK occupied Kashmir. It is a project run of the river scheme with the reservoir located in Muslimabad village, 7 kilometers from Ajat Patan bridge. It is one of the 5 hydropower schemes on Jhelum. So it, the project comprises of 90-meter dam, and it is the second power project built under CPEC. मैंने आप बताया था ना. So CPEC is China is helping the Pakistan. Okay. So there are other projects also in POK. Okay. So Kohala project, Korat hydropower. You can read them. Okay. These are some mere facts. Okay. So that completes this. And the last news for today: India's first transshipment hub, Valar Padam terminal of Cochin port. The Kochi International Container Port. Now, what is transshipment port? तो ये जैसे आपका कोची है यहाँ पे. So transshipment port is a port which allows you to अपना सामान unload करो और यहाँ से आप जा सकते हो आगे. So is known as Valar Padam terminal, is located strategically on the Indian coastline. It is a terminal at the port which handles containers, stores them temporarily, and transfer them to other ships to the onward destination. It is proposed to be developed as the most preferred gateway for South India and leading transshipment hub of South Asia. ठीक है, तो ये terminal port है, which means the big ships can come, stay there, remove their item and can move. It successfully fulfills all the criteria which are needed to develop transshipment hub. It is the best positioned Indian port with regard to proximity. It is located at least average nautical, from all Indian. तो उसका location बहुत strategic है. It can reach anywhere. It entails connectivity, for both east and west coast from Mundra to Kolkata. It has proximity to hinterland market to India. So ये transshipment port means it's a big port where you can undock, you can move, item from there. Normally क्या होता है? The big ships come, and if the port is small, so they can, they can take a small ship, उस पर सामान उतारते हैं, and then it goes in. So this can allow a big, you can ship, and the mother vessels, उनको big ships को mother vessels कहते हैं. The mother vessels can come here and stay at this, and then the item can move. Okay, so that completes in the infrastructure to manage large ship and capacity to scale as per the requirement. So I hope these are factual needs, remember. Okay, so that is all for today, and any questions, guys?